Let's talk about the Amazon Web Services outage that we experienced earlier this week. On Monday, Amazon Web Services, also known as AWS, went down and everybody was experiencing problems. I was talking to my friend on that day and he was talking about how he couldn't access a lot of his applications. People were unable to get onto their social media applications and use those like Snapchat. I use a lot of financial applications like Robinhood and Coinbase, was unable to use those. And this really just made me think about how important and critical this cloud computing is to this internet economy that we are in, and it made me want to look into what happened here and some of these centralization risks that we may have with cloud computing. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. Before we get into it, please make sure to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube. Really appreciate your support. I'm also going to put a QR code down below for a Bitcoin tip. So if you want to support the channel, feel free to leave me a little tip. Now let's get into it. For those of you that aren't familiar with Amazon Web Services, AWS is the world's largest cloud computing provider. And I'm sure that a lot of you aren't familiar with cloud computing. And to be honest with you, I'm not an expert on this. This is something that I haven't really understood. I understand it a little bit more after researching it this week, but for a long time, the cloud just felt like this place that I didn't really understand, right? I just know that it's a place where data is stored, and I'm sure that a lot of other people have kind of felt the same way. But basically, what cloud computing is it's this network of computers that store all the internet's data and applications. So with all these internet companies, right, there's all this data out there, all these applications that need to be run, and these, this data needs to be stored somewhere. A great example is YouTube, right? YouTube has millions of videos, and all that data needs to be stored somewhere, right? It's not stored on your computer. It's stored somewhere out there in the internet, and where it's stored is in the cloud. Now, YouTube's videos aren't stored on AWS's cloud. They're stored in the Google Cloud Platform. So it's a different platform, another one of the popular cloud computing networks out there. But basically, all this data out there needs to be stored somewhere. And really, this cloud infrastructure is very important to the internet economy that we live in. So when we saw AWS go down, the largest cloud computing provider, this caused problems for everyone. The outage impaired many services such as social media and communication apps like Snapchat and WhatsApp. It impaired gaming applications like Fortnite, a very popular one that I've played, Roblox, financial applications like Venmo, Robinhood, and Coinbase. And this is really where I noticed it because I move money around on some of these platforms like Coinbase, and I went on to Coinbase and was unable to do this. So this made me think about how this could be a problem if we experienced a bigger problem with one of these cloud computing platforms and I'm unable to move my money around. That's not great, right? And it made me think, as a person who's holding a lot of Bitcoin, it made me want to hold even more Bitcoin in cold storage. I hold most of my Bitcoin in cold storage because I think it's the best way to do it. I think it gives you more control over your money. But with some Bitcoin on these platforms, I was unable to move it around. We also saw travel and delivery services impacted. United Airlines was experiencing delays. Customers missed their flights. DoorDash, a popular food delivery app, went down. So many services were impacted by this outage. And I think it just shows the magnitude of this issue, right? When you have a big centralized network go down and have problems, it can really affect everyone. Now, what caused this outage? It wasn't a hack or an attack on AWS. This was actually just a technical error that snowballed into much bigger issues. So this is a highly complex system, and if one thing goes wrong in one region, it can sometimes lead to things snowballing. It can lead to a domino-like effect, and that's what happened here. Now, I'm going to get into what technically happened here, which I'm going to be completely honest with you, I don't really understand, but I'm going to try to break it down the best I can. I'm not an expert on cloud computing. This is highly technical stuff, so I'm going to try to break it down to my best ability. What happened is the DNS, the domain name system resolution, failed for DynamoDB endpoints in the US East 1 region. So The DNS, this domain name system, is basically like the internet's phone book, and it translates names into IP addresses. So when the DNS goes down, it basically makes it difficult for different services to communicate with each other and find each other. When the DNS went down, this kind of spiraled into a bunch of other issues. Another thing is that this US East 1 region is AWS's oldest and busiest region. So maybe this is a region that has a lot of vulnerabilities, and the vulnerabilities in this region and the problems that we saw earlier this week really spiraled into a global issue. So to me, this whole situation just kind of highlights that there is some fragility to the system. You could have one little thing go wrong and it can lead to everything spiraling out of control. Just looking at how many services were impacted by this outage, I think it highlights how dependent the internet economy is on these large centralized cloud computing providers. When we look at AWS powers about 1/3 of the cloud market, and the other two big players are Google Cloud Platform and Microsoft Azure. But with these large entities, if one of them experiences problems, a lot of different entities are impacted. So when we saw this outage, we saw billions lost in productivity. And this really makes you think, do we need an alternative to this system? Now, I'm not sure there is a great alternative, and if we're being honest, this was a pretty short outage. It was resolved within a day, so although there were issues, they got fixed pretty quick. And I think that a good goal for these cloud computing platforms is just to try to mitigate issues and outages, right? I think that some things have to be centralized like this, and there really is a big benefit to using a cloud platform like AWS, right? Companies that use this cloud platform to store their data, it allows them to scale as they get more data. It allows them to be more cost efficient, right? For companies to not use these platforms and try to store all their data themselves, it can be very costly. It can be a very big process. It's a lot easier for them to outsource this task to a large cloud computing provider. One thing that we saw, which was interesting, is that some of these decentralized cryptocurrencies experienced problems with this AWS outage. Many of these layer 2 cryptos and platforms host nodes or APIs on AWS. So when AWS went down, some of these cryptos and these crypto platforms had problems. And one of these crypto platforms that had problems was the Uniswap decentralized exchange, which experienced failures and delays. So this is just telling us that if you claim to be decentralized, if you think your crypto is decentralized and they're dependent on AWS, it's not really decentralized, right? Really, this is centralization, and for many of these cryptocurrencies, they have many centralized aspects about them. Now, I believe that these cloud computing providers like AWS are offering a very beneficial service to the internet economy. They're allowing these internet companies and these entities to optimize their data storage, and I think that's a great thing. But I do think that this situation highlights the problems with centralization, right? When you have a centralized entity that everyone is dependent on and one thing starts to fall apart, it can impact everyone. And this really makes me think about the monetary system, which has a big centralization problem, right? With the central bank, with the Federal Reserve, their decisions really impact everyone, right? And everyone who is in that system and using that money is impacted. If they make a bad decision, or if they make a decision that leads to the money supply growing or more inflation, then every day people are impacted. You also think about things like the banks, right? These centralized entities that we all do our finance through, that we transact through. If there's a big problem with a banking entity like JP Morgan Chase or Wells Fargo, and one of them shuts down, then everyone is impacted, right? Everybody's money runs into problems if you're in that system. So I just think that when it comes to centralization, we have to decide what systems we want to be centralized and what systems are better decentralized. And I think when you look at a monetary system, if we can have a more decentralized monetary system like Bitcoin, I think that would be great. So I hope that we're moving in that direction. I hope that we don't see any more Amazon Web Services outages, but we will have to see. That's going to wrap it up for this one. If you didn't like and subscribe, please make sure to do that now. Thanks for watching. I'll be back soon.